quarrel with this. The service requirements that you speak of that are on the utility companies has a lot more to do with forcing the individual utility companies and distribution companies to provide the infrastructure for allowing voltage to run through their system by producing the gates that are required to let that happen than they are with respect to any individual power company not being able to generate power for their customers in a particular locale or region. Would you quarrel with that, or if you do quarrel with that, I'd like to know why.
I understand. I need to think about that one for just a second. The gates that we have, and it goes back to the way the industry was put together. Before we moved to any interconnected grid system, each utility was an island unto itself, and it had enough generating support where if it lost a generator that it could cover that load that it had in its own territory. But that was close to 60 or 70 years ago. And after the nation came out of World War II, we started to interconnect a little bit more because people began to realize that there were some places where there was excess power being produced that could be sold or could be utilized in other ways. And it developed first on the West Coast, where people began to understand that the generation of hydroelectric power from the dams on the Columbia River provided a lot more power than the Pacific Northwest needed in the summertime, and could help meet the air conditioning load, the early penetration of air conditioning load in Southern California, and hence the development of that corridor as a direct current corridor. And the way in which those were to provide for gateways. And today we are building as much as we can. We are investing about $6 billion this year in transmission for the nation. And that's primarily to beef up and upgrade so that we can operate and maintain our reliability at close to 100% level, which is what most of us expect whether we're at home. When we plug something in or turn on a switch, we expect the power to be there.
And like our heart surgeon, we want him to be 100% reliable.
Exactly, like a heart surgeon or any medical practitioner, you want 100% cure. And it's unacceptable not to have that the other part of what's happening in the electric side is that with the proliferation of more and more high-tech devices that run on closer and closer edges to what we would term pure power, where there is very little voltage change and are very sensitive to those changes, it's become more incumbent upon us to beef up the grid, and that's why you see the billions of dollars in both distribution and transmission taking place at this point in time, sir.
I'm just curious. We were out at the Hawthorne plant yesterday. Mm-hmm. We talked about cogeneration,
right,
and the need for having that capability, which you have at the Hawthorne plant. But you said you were building a plant pretty soon, or becoming online in the not too distant future.
We're in process of building a plant at our I-10 facility.
Right, it'll come online in
2010.
2010. And I asked the question, will there be cogeneration capability at that plant? And I think you said no.
No.
I don't understand why anybody would build a power generating unit that didn't have some kind of backup cogeneration facility, except for the fact that the grid allows for gates where you can take power off the grid and replace that power virtually on a moment's notice, because you're sitting in the control room with 14 different screens in front of you, and you're monitoring that voltage literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, without one moment's downtime, if you will, or not being monitored. I mean, you have to do that. You absolutely have to do that.
Right.
And then if for some reason that the plant cannot generate that capacity, you simply go on the market, if you will, and take that power off the grid from other sources.
And I guess I want to clarify, when you talk cogeneration, I guess I'm thinking dual fueled. that the plant would either be able to burn coal or gas is kind of
Right,
the
that's
question
exactly
you're
what I
asking.
meant,
Where to me, what a cogeneration is, it's where you take a simple cycle combustion turbine, which has about a 13,000 heat rate, which means it takes 13 MCF of gas to generate 1 megawatt of electricity. You put a heat recovery system on the back of it, and because you're using that excess heat from your combustion turbine, now you can generate a megawatt of electricity with, say, 8 MCF of gas. So in the industry, I think that's more of a term for cogeneration
Right.
that we would understand. Why we would not build a dual fuel fired unit, it's several things. One, it's engineering. When you design a plant and we design the size of the boiler, that's dependent upon the type of fuel you're going to put into it, what the BTU characteristics are, what the moisture content is. And those are drastically different between bituminous coal, PRB coal, and gas. So,
Right.
so it would take different designs. You would have to build redundancy. You would have to build it to handle whichever the lowest value was. You would also have to put in dual fuel systems into the boiler to where you could either blow pulverized coal into it or you could put gas into it. Again, it's additional cost in the millions of dollars to have that dual capability. But the biggest issue is the fuel itself. You know, when you talk about having the ability to put natural gas into a boiler, on what day is that going to happen? Because when I go contract for gas transportation, I have to assume that I'm going to need that natural gas on any day, in any hour, across the entire course of the year. And so again, when we talk about a 900 megawatt coal-fired unit, we would have to we would burn roughly 90,000 MCF of gas an hour, which is a large quantity. We would have to build a pipeline up to that plant that would probably be in the 3 to 4 foot diameter and would cost in the hundreds of millions of dollars to put in. In addition, we would have to commit to firm capacity that we were going to utilize that and pay for it, whether we used it or not. And so again, we would be talking about tens of millions of dollars in additional annual operating cost for something that you might use once a year, twice a year, or never at all. And so the question comes down to, is it more economical to invest in those pipeline assets and that transportation, or to rely on the electric transmission grid to be able to import power during periods when that unit might be off?
Right. So that's what makes it possible for you not to have to do that. It's the fact that you can pull power off the grid either in the west or in the east.
That, and also our other generation. When you asked earlier for Kansas City Power and Light, and again I'm using hypothetical numbers, if our peak load is projected to be 3,000 megawatts this summer, we have to keep an additional, we have to have all of that 3,000 within our system plus an additional 12.5%. So we have to have 3,360 megawatts that we would have access to on any day during the year. And so we have a combination of coal units, gas units, oil units that in combination we could bring up, that if the grid was not there, if we could not buy power from someplace else, theoretically we could use all of our assets to meet our load. And as long as a unit outage wasn't more than that 12.5%, we would still be able to meet our load even without having any interaction with the grid.
Okay. I think I heard you say just a few minutes ago, in response to a question from Commissioner Mulvey, Commissioner Mulvey asked you what you expected to happen to your rates for coal transportation once the legacy contracts expired. And I think I heard you say you would not necessarily expect prices to go up.
Well, I think there's, again, two different questions.
Is that what you said?
If you ask me what I expect when my contract comes up, I expect my rates to go up significantly because of the current market power. The question I thought he had asked was, shouldn't you expect that to happen, that once a legacy contract comes up that you would expect rates to go up?
Right.
And my answer is no. Again, historically, when you took into account that rates were adjusting through this RCAF factor, and when you took into consideration that the railroads were having productivity gains that are not part of the RCAF factor, their costs were going down, my rates were going up. So would I expect a significant rate increase at the end of the contract? And the answer would be no.
I just absolutely fail to understand the logic of that answer. I just don't understand that at all. A contract has been in effect for years based on the prices that the railroads were charging at a time when they were suffering extremely low revenues, and a lot of them were in bankruptcy. To come out of a situation like that, it sort
But
of
you have
defies
to be
logic
ma-
to
but
me
you
that
have
the
to be
prices
making
wouldn't
it-
go up, especially
but-
when you take into consideration the fact that based on the numbers I see, the average revenue per ton mile for coal is the lowest rate being paid.
But you have to take into account what's the cost associated with generating that revenue. And to me, that's the part of this equation that is always missed and that's not discussed. We can talk about revenue. It's low, yes, because these are the most efficient train moves that a railroad can handle. You basically put 133 cars in a circle on a superhighway and you let it run around. You're not taking up huge amounts of yard space. You're not taking up... Anyway, they're very efficient moves. So if you want to look at the revenue ton miles, that's fine. But take a look at the cost side as well, and then let's start talking margin. And again, margin is where we can have a disagreement. If in statements I've seen from the carriers, they're arguing that coal is not as profitable as some of their other moves. I think we've put in into other hearings that you've had that we disagree with that. We feel, and our experts feel, that coal is still a very profitable move for the railroads. And so if the profit margins are still there, if they can still generate not only their cost of service, but a healthy return on it, then why should I expect my rate to go up 30, 40, or 50% simply because I have a legacy contract?